Alien King sees a human girl begging in the rain with twin babies. What he discovered made him cry. The rain fell like bullets against the cracked concrete of Settlement 47, each drop carrying the metallic taste of a poisoned sky. King Kalian pulled his weathered hood lower, the rough fabric scratching against skin that had never known such coarse material. His fingers, usually adorned with rings of power, now bore the calluses and dirt of a common trader, a disguise 3 months in the making. The human settlement sprawled before him like a wound on the earth's surface. Makeshift shelters constructed from salvaged metal sheets and plastic tarps lined what had once been a thriving marketplace. Now it served as a desperate trading post where humans bartered scraps of food for medicine, ammunition, or anything that might keep them alive another day. The acrid smell of burning refuse mixed with unwashed bodies and desperation hung in the air like a suffocating blanket. This is what we've done to them, Kalian thought, his alien heart clenching with guilt that had driven him from his golden palace to witness this misery firsthand. This is what our wars have created. 3 years had passed since the Great Accord, the treaty that supposedly brought peace between his kind and the humans of Earth. But peace for the powerful meant little to those scraping by in settlements like this one. The humans here were the forgotten ones, the casualties of a conflict that had raged across the stars while politicians spoke of unity and prosperity. A merchant's voice cut through the pattering rain. "Fresh water! 2 cans for a med pack. Last call before the storm hits." Kalian adjusted the strap of his pack, filled with modest goods that would maintain his cover as a traveling trader. His true form, 7 feet tall with luminescent blue skin and eyes that held the wisdom of millennia, was carefully hidden beneath a biomask that made him appear as a weathered human man in his 40s. The technology was painful to wear for extended periods, but it was the only way to move among his former enemies without causing panic or reverence. The wind picked up, rattling the metal sheets that served as roofing for the ramshackle stalls. Dark clouds churned overhead like an angry sea, and Kalian could smell the electricity in the air. A bad storm was coming, the kind that could wash away entire settlements in minutes. "Storm's gonna be a big one!" someone shouted. "Everyone to the shelters!" The marketplace erupted into chaos. Vendors frantically secured their goods while customers grabbed whatever they could afford and ran. Children cried as parents snatched them up, their faces etched with the constant fear that defined life in the outer settlements. Kalian watched it all with growing sorrow, remembering when he had believed his people's propaganda about humans being resilient and adaptable. They were resilient, yes, but only because they had no choice. The first real lightning strike split the sky, followed immediately by thunder that shook the ground. Rain began falling in sheets, turning the dusty settlement roads into rivers of mud. Most people had found shelter now, but as Kalian hurried toward a small overhang to wait out the storm, something made him pause. There, in the center of what had been the bustling marketplace, a figure knelt in the mud. At first, he thought it might be someone who had fallen, perhaps injured in the scramble for shelter. But as his enhanced vision adjusted to the storm's chaos, he realized the truth was far worse. It was a young woman, maybe 25, with blonde hair plastered to her skull by the driving rain. She wore clothes that might have been nice once but were now little more than rags held together by desperation and stubbornness. She wasn't seeking shelter. She was begging. "Please!" Her voice carried on the wind, barely audible above the storm's fury. "My babies need food. Please, anything you can spare." Kalian's breath caught in his throat. Clutched against her chest, protected by a torn but carefully positioned cloak, were 2 tiny forms. Babies. Twins, by the look of them, no more than a few months old. The woman, girl, really, for she looked so young, was using her own body as a shield against the storm, letting the rain soak her to the bone while keeping her children as dry as possible. But that wasn't what made him freeze in place, his alien heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. There was something about her face, something that cut through the rain and years and careful disguise of memory. The delicate curve of her jaw, the way she held her head even in desperation, proud despite everything. A flash of lightning illuminated her features for just a moment, and Kalian felt the world tilt on its axis. It couldn't be. Please! She called again, her voice breaking. They haven't eaten in 2 days. The storm raged around her, but she didn't move. Other figures hurried past, heads down, focused on their own survival. No one stopped. No one even looked twice at the young mother begging in the mud with 2 babies dying in her arms. Kalian found himself moving before his mind had caught up with his body. His feet splashed through puddles as he approached her, and when he got close enough to truly see her face, his worst fears and most impossible hopes collided in his chest. The locket. Even through the rain and her torn clothing, he could see it, a small silver pendant hanging around her neck. Simple, almost worthless by most standards, but he knew every scratch on its surface. He had given it to someone once, years ago, in what seemed like another lifetime. Miss, he said, his voice carefully modulated to hide the tremor of recognition. You need to get out of this storm. She looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, gray-blue and filled with a pain that went far deeper than physical hunger. Those eyes. He had dreamed of them more times than he could count. I can't, she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered, though thinner now, worn down by hardship. I have nowhere to go. Nonsense, Kalian heard himself say, though his thoughts were reeling. There's an old cabin about half a mile from here. Used to be a checkpoint station. It's not much, but it's dry. She stared at him with suspicion that had been earned through harsh experience. Why would you help me? Because I loved you once. Because I broke your heart. Because these might be. Because it's what decent people do, he said instead, extending his hand. Come on. Before this storm gets worse. For a moment she hesitated, and he could see her weighing her options, trust a stranger or watch her babies die in the rain. The babies made soft mewling sounds, weak with hunger, and her decision was made. Okay, she whispered, struggling to stand while keeping the twins protected. Okay. Kalian helped her to her feet, and when her hand touched his, he felt the same electric shock he had experienced years ago, in a different world, when he had been someone else entirely. She was thinner than before, worn down by struggles he could only imagine, but she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. As they hurried through the storm toward shelter, Kalian caught a glimpse of the babies' faces in the lightning's glow. His breath caught. Their eyes, even in sleep, there was something unmistakably familiar about them. Something that made his alien blood sing with recognition and terror. The storm raged around them, but Kalian barely felt the rain anymore. His entire universe had narrowed to this moment, walking through the mud with a woman he had thought lost forever, carrying children who might hold the key to everything he had gained and lost. He didn't know her name in this life. She clearly didn't recognize him beneath his disguise and the years of separation. But as they approached the distant cabin, one truth burned in his mind like a star. After 3 years of searching the galaxy for redemption, it had found him instead. In the form of a beggar girl with storm-colored eyes and 2 babies who looked disturbingly, impossibly, like they might be his own. The abandoned checkpoint cabin squatted against the hillside like a forgotten monument to better times. Its walls were thick concrete, built to withstand the worst storms, and though the windows were boarded up and weeds grew through cracks in the foundation, it was dry and solid. Kalian pushed open the heavy door, its hinges protesting with a rusty screech. It's not much, he said, stepping aside to let her enter first. But it'll keep the rain out. The young woman hesitated at the threshold, clutching her babies tighter. Even in desperate circumstances, she was careful, a survivor's instinct that spoke of hard-learned lessons. Finally, she stepped inside, water dripping from her soaked clothes onto the dusty floor. The interior was sparse but functional. A few pieces of abandoned furniture remained, a metal table, 2 chairs, and an old cot in the corner. Someone had left behind some basic supplies, a few cans of food, some blankets that smelled of mildew but were dry. It wasn't luxury, but for someone who had been begging in the rain, it might as well have been a palace. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with exhaustion and something that might have been tears. I don't know how to repay this kindness. No need, Kalian said, trying to keep his voice steady as he watched her carefully set the babies down on the cleanest blanket. What's your name? She looked up at him, those storm-gray eyes searching his face as if trying to decide how much truth she could afford to share. Arya, she said finally. Arya Clark. The name hit him like a physical blow. Arya. He had whispered that name in the darkness, carved it into his memory during the lonely years that followed his departure from Earth. She had been Arya then too, though her last name had been different. Morrison, he remembered now. She must have married after he left. No, he realized with growing horror, as he noticed there was no wedding ring on her finger. Not married. She changed her name because she had to disappear. Because of what I did to her. I'm Marcus. He lied, using the identity he had carefully constructed for this mission. Marcus Webb. Arya nodded absently, already focused entirely on her babies. She unwrapped them from the sodden cloak with the gentle efficiency of a mother who had learned to care for children under impossible circumstances. In the dim light filtering through the boarded windows, Kalian got his first clear look at the twins. His breath stopped in his throat. They were perfect, tiny, fragile, but unmistakably healthy despite their obvious hunger. The boy had Arya's delicate features but with an impossible shade of pale blonde hair that seemed almost white. The girl was darker, with hair that reminded him of earth after rain. But their eyes. God help him, their eyes. When the little girl stirred and opened them for just a moment, they glowed. Soft, barely visible in the dim cabin, but there was no mistaking that ethereal blue light. It was subtle now, they were too young for the full manifestation, but Kalian had seen that glow in his own reflection every day for over 300 years. The mark of his bloodline. The unmistakable sign of royal heritage. These weren't just any babies. They were his children. They're beautiful, he managed to say, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. Arya smiled for the first time since he had found her, and the expression transformed her face completely. For a moment, she wasn't a desperate beggar fighting for survival. She was the young woman he had fallen in love with years ago, full of hope and laughter and dreams. They're my whole world, she said softly, gently stroking the boy's cheek. Samuel and Luna. 3 months old tomorrow, if I've been counting right. 3 months. Kalian's mind raced backward, calculating dates. It fit perfectly with the timeline of when he had last been on Earth, when he had been forced to leave her without explanation to prevent a war that would have consumed both their worlds. Their father? He heard himself ask, though every word felt like swallowing broken glass. Arya's expression darkened immediately, and when she looked up at him, there was a pain in her eyes so raw and deep that it made him want to confess everything right there. To fall to his knees and beg her forgiveness for what his duty had forced him to do. Gone, she said, the single word carrying the weight of years of betrayal and abandonment. He made me believe in fairy tales. Made me think I was special, that what we had was real. Her voice grew bitter. Turns out I was just entertainment. A distraction. When he got bored, he disappeared without even saying goodbye. Each word was a knife to his heart. This was how she remembered him, not as a man who had agonized over leaving her, who had spent every night since then wondering if she was safe, but as a coward who had used her and thrown her away. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it more than any words he had ever spoken. Don't be, Arya said, but he could hear the tears she was fighting. I learned my lesson. I learned that men who seem too good to be true usually are. That promises don't mean anything when things get difficult. She lifted baby Luna, who was beginning to fuss with hunger, and Kalian saw the locket around her neck catch the dim light. The small silver pendant he had given her on their last night together, when he had promised to return soon. She still wore it, after all this time and all this pain. He left me with more than just a broken heart. Arya continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. These two are everything good that came from something terrible. And no matter what happens, I'll never let anyone hurt them the way their father hurt me. The way their father hurt her. Kalian closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had done. In trying to save both their worlds, he had destroyed the one person who had mattered most to him. And now his children, their children, were starving in a refugee settlement, while their mother begged for scraps to keep them alive. "You're a good mother," he said quietly, because it was true and because he couldn't trust himself to say anything else. "I try to be," Arya replied, cradling Luna against her chest. "They're all I have left of who I used to be, before everything fell apart." Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, but inside the small cabin, another storm was just beginning. Kalian sat in the shadows, watching the woman he had loved and lost tend to children he had never known existed, children who carried his blood and her strength. He couldn't tell her who he was. Not yet. Not when she had made it clear that she hated the man who had fathered her children. Not when revealing the truth might put all of them in danger. But he could protect them. He could find a way to undo some of the damage his choices had caused. As Arya hummed a soft lullaby to quiet the babies, Kalian made a silent vow. Whatever it cost him, his throne, his life, his very identity, he would never abandon them again. Even if she never knew who had made that promise. Night fell over the settlement like a heavy curtain, muffling the sounds of the dying storm. Inside the cabin, Kalian had managed to coax light from an old heating unit, filling the small space with blessed warmth. The flickering light cast dancing shadows on the walls as Arya fed the twins from a can of nutrient paste he had provided from his pack. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I know you have your own business to attend to. Your own family, probably." "No family," Kalian replied, settling into the chair across from her. "And nowhere urgent to be." It was both truth and lie. He had no wife, no children he had acknowledged, but he ruled over billions of subjects across 3 star systems. Yet watching Arya carefully portion out the food to make it last, seeing the way she tested each spoonful on her own tongue before feeding it to Samuel and Luna, he knew there was nowhere in the universe he would rather be. "You're very kind to strangers," Arya observed, a note of suspicion still lingering in her voice. "That's rare these days. Maybe I see something of myself in your situation," he said carefully. She glanced up at him then, really looking at him for the first time since they had met. Her gaze lingered on his hands, his posture, the quality of his clothes beneath the traitor's disguise. "You're not really a traitor, are you?" she asked. "Your hands are too soft. Your speech too educated." Kalian's pulse quickened. "What makes you say that? I wasn't always living like this," Arya said, returning her attention to Luna, who was fussing despite the food. "I used to be good at reading people. Had to be, in my old job." "What did you do before all this?" A shadow crossed her face. "I was a cultural liaison. Worked with the integration programs when the first alien visitors came to Earth. Back when we thought they might actually care about humans as equals rather than curiosities." The irony hit Kalian like a physical blow. She had been working to build bridges between their species while he had been falling in love with her under false pretenses. No wonder she felt so betrayed. "That must have been fascinating work," he said, fighting to keep his voice neutral. "It was, until I made the mistake of believing my own propaganda about cross-species understanding and cooperation." Her laugh was bitter. "Turns out some visitors were just looking for entertainment. Local flavor to sample before moving on to more important things. Maybe he had reasons," Kalian found himself saying. "Maybe leaving wasn't his choice." Arya's eyes flashed with anger. "There's always a choice. He could have explained. He could have said goodbye. He could have." She stopped herself, taking a shaky breath. "It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what happened after." "After?" For a long moment, she was quiet, adjusting Luna in her arms and humming softly. Then, as if a dam had burst, the words came pouring out. "When I found out I was pregnant, I thought. I was so naive. I thought maybe if I could find him, tell him about the babies, he would come back. That we could be a family." She shook her head at her own foolishness. "I tried everything. Contacted every alien embassy, every integration office, Even the damn royal delegation that had visited our sector. Nothing. Kalian's throat constricted. She had been looking for him. While he had been fighting a war across the galaxy, she had been pregnant and alone, trying to reach him through official channels that would never have connected her to the alien king traveling under deep cover. By the time the twins were born, it was obvious what they were. Arya continued. The eyes gave it away. Not fully developed yet, but enough that people started talking. Started pointing. Started asking questions I couldn't answer. What did you do? At first, I tried to stay. Thought I could weather the gossip, the suspicion. My neighbors had known me for years. Surely they would support me. Her voice grew hollow. I was wrong. The day someone threw a rock through my window with a note calling my children alien spawn, I knew we had to leave. The image of Arya, barely recovered from childbirth, packing up her life because of hatred directed at children who had done nothing wrong, filled Kalian with a rage so pure it took all his control not to let his true nature show. Where did you go? Everywhere. Nowhere. We've been moving from settlement to settlement for months. Some places tolerate us for a while, others. She gestured to her worn clothes, her thin frame. Others make it clear we're not welcome from the moment we arrive. But why not seek help from the alien authorities? Surely they have programs for situations like this? Arya's laugh was harsh. Programs for abandoned human mothers with half-alien children? You think they advertise that? The official position is that such relationships are informal cultural exchanges with no lasting obligations. The children exist in a legal gray area, not quite human, not quite alien, belonging nowhere. Kalian felt sick. These were the policies his own council had crafted, the careful diplomatic language that avoided responsibility while maintaining plausible deniability. He had been so focused on the grand political implications that he had never considered the personal cost. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Don't be sorry for me, Arya replied, but her voice was softer now. Be sorry for them. She looked down at the twins, now sleeping peacefully in her arms. They didn't ask to be caught between two worlds. They didn't ask for eyes that marked them as different, or for a father who valued his secrets more than his children. Maybe he didn't know, Kalian whispered. Maybe, Arya agreed. But that almost makes it worse, doesn't it? That he could walk away so easily, never wondering what he left behind. As the night deepened, they spoke of smaller things, the twins' personalities, the places Arya had seen in her wandering, the kindnesses of strangers that had kept them alive. Kalian found himself marveling at her strength, the way she had endured abandonment, poverty, and persecution, while never losing her fierce protectiveness toward her children. His children. When Arya finally dozed, exhausted by warmth and a full stomach, Kalian kept watch. In the quiet cabin, with the storm finally past, he made promises in the darkness. To the woman sleeping with his children in her arms, to the babies who carried his blood, and to himself. He would find a way to undo the damage he had caused. He would give them the life they deserved, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. Even if Arya never forgave the man who had broken her heart. Dawn crept through the boarded windows like a hesitant intruder, painting the cabin's interior in shades of gold and amber. Kalian had not slept. He had spent the night watching Arya and the twins, memorizing the peaceful expressions on their faces, knowing that when morning came, everything would change. He had sent the coded message an hour before sunrise, a simple signal that would bring his royal guard to his location. It was necessary. The storm had passed, and by now, the settlement's residents would be emerging from their shelters. Someone would have seen him with Arya, would remember the stranger who had helped the beggar woman with the glowing-eyed babies. His cover would be blown within hours. Better to control the revelation than let it explode around them. But as he heard the first distant hum of approaching ships, Kalian felt his resolve waver. Arya slept curled around the twins on the old cot, her blonde hair fanned across the pillow like spun sunlight. In sleep, the lines of worry and hardship smoothed from her face, and she looked almost exactly as she had 3 years ago when he had first fallen in love with her. The humming grew louder, becoming a roar that shook the cabin's walls. Arya's eyes snapped open, instantly alert with the hypervigilance of someone who had learned that safety was always temporary. "What's that noise?" Before Kalian could answer, the roar became deafening. Through the gaps in the boarded windows, brilliant lights blazed, turning the dim cabin into a stage. The twins woke with sharp cries, terrified by the sudden cacophony. "Ships," Kalian said quietly, his heart breaking as he watched understanding dawn in Arya's eyes. "Military vessels. We have to run," she whispered, scooping up Samuel and Luna. "If they're looking for us, for the babies." "Arya, wait!" But she was already moving, clutching the twins against her chest as she headed for the door. She yanked it open and froze. The cabin was surrounded. Hundreds of armored figures stood in perfect formation, their sleek black armor gleaming in the morning sun. Advanced weapons were trained not on the cabin, but outward, a protective perimeter rather than an attack formation. Massive ships hovered overhead, their hulls bearing the insignia that every human on Earth had learned to recognize and fear, the golden starburst of the Colonian Royal Fleet. "No!" Arya breathed, backing away from the door. "No, this can't be happening." The soldiers parted with military precision, creating a pathway through their ranks. Down this corridor marched a figure in more elaborate armor, silver and blue with flowing ceremonial elements that marked him as a high-ranking officer. He reached the cabin door and, to Arya's shock, dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty," the officer said in a voice that carried clearly across the settlement. "We have located you. Are you unharmed?" The world seemed to stop. Arya turned slowly, her storm-gray eyes wide with disbelief and growing horror. She looked at the man she had known as Marcus Webb, the kind trader who had offered her shelter, and for the first time, she truly saw him. The way he held himself, not like a merchant, but like someone accustomed to command. The quality of his hidden features, too perfect, too symmetrical to be entirely human. The strange, otherworldly grace in his movements that she had attributed to good breeding rather than alien heritage. "Your Majesty?" she whispered. Kalian's biomass began to shimmer and fade as the technology automatically deactivated in the presence of his guard. His true form emerged like a revelation, 7 feet of luminescent blue skin, eyes that held the depth of centuries, and features that were unmistakably regal. The weathered human trader dissolved, replaced by the alien king who had ruled over 3 star systems for longer than most civilizations had existed. "Arya," he said, and his voice was different now, deeper, resonant with the authority of absolute power. "Please let me explain." "You're him," she said, her voice barely audible above the twins' crying. "You're the alien king. The one who—" Her face went white as the full implications hit her. "Oh God. You were laughing at me, weren't you? The whole time, you were laughing at the stupid human girl who thought—" "No." Kalian stepped toward her, but she backed away, shaking her head violently. "Don't come near me!" Her voice cracked with betrayal so raw it made several of the guards shift uncomfortably. "First you break my heart as some mysterious stranger, and now you show up pretending to be a good Samaritan while you're actually the most powerful being in the galaxy? What kind of sick game is this?" "It's not a game," Kalian said desperately. "I never meant for any of this to happen. When I left Earth 3 years ago. 3 years ago," she repeated, and her voice went deadly quiet. The twins were wailing now, sensing their mother's distress, but Arya seemed beyond noticing. "You left Earth 3 years ago. The same time that he disappeared from my life." The moment of realization was visible on her face, a dawning horror that started in her eyes and spread across her features like a physical transformation. She looked down at the crying twins, then back at Kalian, and he saw the exact moment when all the pieces fell into place. "No," she whispered. "Please tell me you're not." "I am," Kalian said, his voice breaking. "I am their father. I am the man who loved you, who left you, who has regretted every day since then. I am Marcus Webb and David Thorne and King Kalian of Colonia, and I know that none of those names matter because I destroyed the only one that ever did, the man you loved." The silence that followed was broken only by the twins' cries and the distant hum of the ship's engines. Arya stared at him as if seeing a monster, and Kalian realized that perhaps she was. "You knew," she said finally, her voice hollow. "Last night, when I told you about him, about what he did to me, you knew you were listening to me describe my hatred for you." "Yes." "And you said nothing." "What could I say? That I left to prevent a war? That every moment away from you was agony? That I searched for you for months when I finally returned, only to find you had vanished?" His composure cracked completely. "What words could possibly undo the pain I caused you?" Arya looked down at Samuel and Luna, their small faces red with crying, their distinctive eyes beginning to glow more brightly in their distress. When she looked back up, there was no forgiveness in her expression, only a fury so pure it made the morning air seem to crackle. "Take us to your palace," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Arya. I said take us to your palace, your majesty." The title dripped with venom. "You want to explain? Fine. But not here, not in front of these people who have suffered enough because of your kind." She walked past him toward the waiting formation of guards, her chin raised with a dignity that remained unbroken despite everything. As she passed, Kalian caught her arm gently. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered. She looked at him with eyes like winter storms. "That," she said quietly, "makes it so much worse." The royal palace of Colonia rose from the clouds like a crystal dream made manifest, its spires twisting impossibly high into the alien sky. Arya pressed her face to the transport window, clutching Samuel and Luna as the ship ascended toward the structure that defied every law of physics she understood. The palace seemed to float on wisps of luminescent mist, its walls shifting between transparency and opacity as if built from captured starlight. "It's beautiful," she whispered despite herself, then immediately hated that she had given Kalian even that small admission. "It's a prison," she corrected, louder this time, as the transport settled onto a landing platform carved from what appeared to be solid diamond. Kalian, now fully revealed in his true form, turned from the pilot's console. His blue skin seemed to pulse with inner light, and those ancient eyes held depths that made her dizzy to look into. This was not the kind stranger who had sheltered her from the storm. This was a being of immense power who could reshape worlds with a thought. "You're not a prisoner, Arya," he said gently. "You're under my protection." "What's the difference?" she shot back, but her voice lacked its earlier fire. The twins had exhausted themselves crying during the flight and now slept fitfully against her chest. Their small faces were pale, and she could see the stress of the morning's revelations affecting them even in sleep. As they disembarked, Arya found herself surrounded by luxury beyond imagination. Servants in flowing robes that seemed to be cut from liquid silver hurried forward, offering assistance that felt more like elegant imprisonment. The palace corridors stretched endlessly in every direction, their walls displaying shifting murals that told the history of a civilization spanning millennia. "These will be your quarters," Kalian said, gesturing toward doors that opened at his approach. "Anything you need, simply ask. Food, clothing, medical care for the children." "I need to leave," Arya interrupted, but even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. Where could she go? Back to begging in settlements where her children would starve? The reality of her situation was settling in like a weight on her chest. The rooms beyond the doors were larger than any home she had ever lived in, decorated in soothing shades of blue and silver that complemented the alien architecture. A nursery had already been prepared, 2 small beds with monitoring equipment that hummed softly, indicating the palace's systems were already learning to care for hybrid children. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked, suspicion creeping back into her voice. "I haven't been planning anything," Kalian replied. "My staff is simply efficient." As if summoned by his words, a figure appeared in the doorway, tall, elegant, with the silver skin and elongated features that marked her as pure Colonian nobility. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Arya caught the flash of disgust that crossed her features when she looked at the twins. "Your Majesty," the woman said, her voice like crystalline bells. "The Royal Council requests your immediate presence." There are concerns that require urgent discussion. Tell them I'll join them shortly, Counselor Vex, Kalian replied. They were quite insistent, Majesty. The matter of the human situation cannot wait. The words stung, even though Arya had expected them. She was a situation now, a problem to be managed. The twins stirred in her arms, and she held them closer. Go, she said to Kalian, not meeting his eyes. Handle your politics. We'll be fine. She could feel his hesitation, but eventually he nodded. I'll return as soon as possible. If you need anything, I know. Simply ask. Her tone was flat, dismissive. After he left, Arya found herself alone with the babies in rooms that could have housed 50 people comfortably. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft whisper of air circulation systems and the distant hum of the palace's impossible machinery. She tried to settle in, feeding the twins from bottles that had been provided, nutrition designed specifically for hybrid children, she realized with a start. How long had they known about Samuel and Luna? How long had Kalian's people been watching her struggle? An hour later, she heard voices in the corridor outside her quarters. The palace's acoustics were strange, designed to carry sound in ways that defied conventional physics, and she found she could hear conversations from rooms that should have been too far away. Cannot allow this to continue, a harsh voice was saying. The political ramifications alone. Think of the treaties. Another voice interrupted. Earth's government would pay handsomely for leverage over their own people. Half-alien children with royal blood? The possibilities are endless. You're both thinking too small. A third voice added, this one cold and calculating. The real question is whether they represent an opportunity or a threat. Children who bridge both species could be powerful allies or dangerous enemies. Arya's blood turned to ice as the implications sank in. They weren't discussing her children as people, they were discussing them as assets. Political tools. Bargaining chips. The simplest solution. The harsh voice continued. Remains the most prudent. A tragic accident during transport. The human grieves, but accidents happen to refugees all the time. The bloodline remains pure. Counselor Thane. Another voice warned. You speak of murdering children. I speak of protecting the crown. The king's attachment. To these creatures clouds his judgment. Someone must think clearly. Arya sank into a chair, her hands shaking as she held the sleeping twins. These people, Kalian's trusted advisors, were casually discussing killing her babies. And somewhere in this crystal palace, the man who claimed to love her was sitting with them, listening to this, participating in it. She stood abruptly, pacing to the windows that looked out over clouds and impossible vistas. The palace was beautiful, yes, but she was beginning to understand its true nature. It wasn't a sanctuary, it was a trap, elegant and comfortable, but a trap nonetheless. When Kalian returned 2 hours later, she was standing by those windows, still holding the twins. How did it go? She asked without turning around. Your council meeting? She heard his sharp intake of breath and knew her tone had warned him that something was wrong. There were concerns raised, he admitted carefully. What kind of concerns? She turned then, and he took a step back at the fury in her eyes. Concerns about political ramifications? About treaty opportunities? Or were they the kind of concerns that involved tragic accidents during transport? Kalian's face went pale, as much as blue skin could pale. You heard. I heard enough. Arya's voice was steady, but he could see the terror lurking beneath her anger. Tell me honestly, did you bring me here to protect my children or to control them? Because right now, I'm not seeing much difference. Arya, you have to understand. What I understand, she interrupted, is that your counselors are debating whether to use my babies as political tools or simply murder them for convenience. What I understand is that I've traded one kind of danger for another. At least in the settlements, the threats were honest. Kalian moved toward her, but she stepped back, keeping the windows behind her. I would never let anyone hurt them, he said fiercely. They're my children too. Are they? Arya asked. Or are they problems that need solving? Assets that need managing? Because that's how your people talk about them. My people don't understand. No, Arya said, her voice breaking. You don't understand. You brought us to a palace full of people who want us dead or enslaved, and you expected me to be grateful. You expected me to trust you. I am trying to protect you. Then let us go. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the words they couldn't say. Finally, Kalian spoke. I can't do that. Can't or won't. Arya, please. Give me time to make them understand. Time? She laughed bitterly. While your council debates the best way to dispose of inconvenient evidence? While my children sleep in cribs that might become their coffins? She moved toward the door, but Kalian blocked her path. Where would you go? He asked desperately. Back to the settlements? Back to begging for scraps while they starve? At least there, I chose our suffering, Arya replied. Here, I'm just waiting for you to choose it for me. 3 days passed in the Crystal Palace like a slow poison working through Arya's veins. She smiled at the servants, accepted their gifts of clothing and food, and played the part of the grateful refugee while her mind worked frantically on escape plans. The twins were thriving in their climate-controlled nursery, their hybrid metabolism responding well to the specialized nutrition, but Arya saw only the golden bars of their beautiful cage. She had learned the palace routines, memorized the guard rotations, and discovered that the service tunnels used by staff extended far beyond the main structure. What she hadn't counted on was being watched. The human grows restless, Counselor Vex observed, her silver fingers tracing patterns in the air that displayed holographic surveillance footage. She has mapped 17 potential escape routes in the past 2 days. The figure across from her smiled, though the expression held no warmth. General Thax had been exiled from the royal court 5 years prior for disagreeing with the king's progressive policies toward lesser species, but his network of supporters within the military remained extensive. Perfect, he said, watching the footage of Arya testing window locks while the twins slept. She'll make her attempt tonight. The kitchen shift change creates a 12-minute window in the eastern tunnels. My people will be waiting. And if she resists? If she refuses to cooperate? She won't, Thax replied confidently. She's a mother. Threaten the children, and she'll do anything we ask. Including denouncing Kalian publicly as an unfit ruler who consorts with inferior species. Vex's expression remained carefully neutral, but her inner satisfaction was evident. The council will have no choice but to call for his abdication. The throne will need a strong leader to guide us through the transition. Indeed, Thax agreed. And who better than the general who rescued the kingdom from its king's dangerous obsessions? As the conspiracy unfolded in the shadows, Arya was making her final preparations. She had fashioned a carrier from palace linens that would hold both twins against her chest, leaving her hands free to navigate the tunnels. The route she had chosen would take them through the service areas to an old transport bay that housed maintenance vehicles, crude by palace standards, but functional enough to reach the outer settlements. At precisely 2:17 a.m., she slipped from her quarters with Samuel and Luna secured against her chest. The twins seemed to sense the tension and remained remarkably quiet, their distinctive eyes dim in the darkness. Arya moved through corridors she had memorized, her bare feet silent on the crystalline floors. The service tunnels were exactly as she had scouted, narrow, utilitarian passages that connected the palace's various operational centers. For 20 minutes she moved through the maze, following the route that would lead to freedom. When she finally reached the maintenance bay, her heart was pounding with hope and terror. The transport vehicle was an ugly, practical thing compared to the elegant ships she had seen, but it would fly. She had watched the maintenance crews operate similar models and understood the basic controls. As she approached the craft, cradling the twins with one arm while reaching for the door mechanism, she felt the first cold touch of certainty that something was wrong. The bay was too quiet. Too empty. Did you really think it would be that easy? Arya spun around to find herself surrounded by figures in dark armor, not the silver and blue of the Royal Guard, but the deep crimson of military rebels. General Thax emerged from the shadows, his scarred face twisted with satisfaction. The human thinks she understands our technology, our security systems, he said, circling her like a predator. She doesn't realize she's been guided every step of the way. What do you want? Arya demanded, instinctively backing toward the transport even though she knew it was useless. What I've always wanted, a colonia free from contamination. A pure bloodline on the throne. His eyes fixed on the twins with unconcealed disgust. Those abominations represent everything wrong with Kalian's rule. His weakness. His perversion. They're children, Arya said fiercely. Innocent children. They're weapons, Thax corrected. Living proof that our king values alien flesh over the purity of his own species. When the people see what their ruler has created, they'll understand the depths of his betrayal. Soldiers moved closer, weapons raised but not yet aimed at her directly. They wanted her alive, Arya realized, at least temporarily. She was part of whatever twisted plan this was. However, Thax continued, children are also expendable. If their mother proves uncooperative. The threat was clear, and Arya felt her knees nearly buckle. She looked down at Samuel and Luna, so small and helpless in her arms, and knew she would do anything to protect them. Even betray the man who had already betrayed her. What do you want me to do? She whispered. But before Thax could answer, the maintenance bay's blast doors exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Through the smoke and debris came a figure wreathed in blue fire, Kalian, but not as Arya had ever seen him. This was not the gentle king or the disguised traitor. This was a force of nature, power radiating from him in waves that made the air itself burn. Release her! His voice echoed with harmonics that made the metal walls ring, and when he moved, it was with a speed that defied physics. The first soldier who raised a weapon simply ceased to exist, not killed, but unmade, dissolved by forces beyond human understanding. Your Majesty, Thax said, though his voice shook slightly. How unexpected. I was just explaining to your friend the realities of her situation. The only reality. Kalian snarled, advancing through the chaos as his guard poured through the breached doors behind him. Is that you have made the last mistake of your miserable existence. Thax raised his own weapon, a plasma disruptor designed to kill even Colonians, but Kalian didn't even slow down. Energy weapons fire filled the air as the battle erupted around them, but the king moved through it all like a living storm, focused entirely on reaching Arya and the twins. When a stray blast threatened to reach them, Kalian threw himself between the energy and his family, taking a hit that would have killed any normal being. He staggered but kept moving, blue blood streaming from a wound that glowed with residual plasma energy. Kalian! Arya cried out, seeing him hurt, seeing him bleed for them. He reached her just as more explosions rocked the bay, gathering her and the twins into his arms as debris rained down around them. I've got you, he whispered, his voice hoarse with pain and desperate relief. I've got you both. As the royal guard overwhelmed the rebels and the immediate danger passed, Arya looked up into Kalian's ancient eyes and saw something that shattered her remaining defenses. It wasn't just love, it was absolute, unconditional devotion. The kind that would sacrifice kingdoms and empires without hesitation. He had risked everything to save them. Not just his life, but his throne, his people's respect, his entire civilization. For her. For children he had only known existed for a few days. You came, she whispered. I will always come, he replied, pressing his forehead to hers as the twins stirred between them. No matter what it costs me. No matter what I have to destroy. I will always choose you. The medical bay of the royal palace hummed with quiet efficiency as automated systems tended to Kalian's plasma wound. Arya sat in a chair beside his treatment bed, the twins sleeping peacefully in a nearby crib designed to monitor their vital signs. The past few hours had been a blur of interrogations, security briefings, and the systematic dismantling of Thax's rebellion, but now, in the gentle blue light of the healing chamber, they finally had silence. You should rest, Arya said quietly, watching the medical scanners chart the gradual repair of damaged tissue. You lost a lot of blood. I've had worse, Kalian replied, though his voice was weaker than usual. The important thing is that you're safe. That they're safe. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the rescue. His blue skin was pale from blood loss, his usually perfect features marked by exhaustion and pain. But his eyes, those ancient eyes that held the weight of centuries, were focused entirely on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Why? She asked suddenly. Why what? Why did you risk everything? Your throne, your people, your life. Why throw it all away for us? Kalian was quiet for so long that she thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I've been throwing it all away for 3 years already. Every day I spent without you, every night I wondered if you were safe, if you hated me, if you were even alive. That was the real sacrifice. Tonight was just making it official. Arya felt her throat tighten. You don't get to say things like that. Not after what you did to me. I know, he said, struggling to sit up despite the medical restraints. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. But Arya, please, let me explain why I left. Let me tell you the truth about what happened 3 years ago. She wanted to refuse, to protect herself from more beautiful lies, but something in his expression stopped her. This wasn't the alien king or the disguised traitor. This was a man stripped bare, offering her his most vulnerable truths. Tell me, she said. Kalian closed his eyes, as if gathering strength for a confession that had been burning inside him for years. When I met you on Earth, I was there under deep cover, investigating rumors of a planned attack on human settlements. My intelligence suggested that a faction within my own military was planning to frame Earth's government for an assault on Colonian colonies, creating a pretext for total war. Arya's eyes widened. That's why you were using a false identity. David Thorne was supposed to be temporary, a few weeks of investigation, then back to my real life. But then I met you. His voice softened with memory. You were working on cultural exchange programs, so passionate about building bridges between our species. You saw hope where others saw only differences. You made me believe that maybe peace was actually possible. So you lied to me about who you were. Yes, he admitted. But everything else was real. What I felt for you, what we shared, that was the most honest I'd ever been in my life. For the first time in 3 centuries, I wasn't a king or a political symbol. I was just a man in love. Tears started flowing down Arya's cheeks, though she tried to wipe them away. Then why did you leave? If you loved me, why disappear without a word? Kalian's composure finally cracked completely, blue tears streaming down his face. Because my intelligence was wrong. The attack wasn't planned for months in the future. It was happening that night. General Thax and his conspirators were going to obliterate 3 human cities and make it look like a Colonian strike. Billions would have died, and the war that followed would have consumed both our worlds. The night you disappeared. Arya whispered, remembering. You got that urgent message, and you said you had to leave for a few hours. I thought I could stop it, and be back before dawn. I thought I could save everyone and still have you. His voice broke. But stopping the attack meant revealing myself, meant sacrificing my cover completely. The conspirators were arrested, the war was prevented, but David Thorne had to die. Officially, permanently. Arya stared at him, pieces of a puzzle she'd carried for 3 years finally clicking into place. You saved billions of lives. And lost the only one that mattered to me, he said bitterly. By the time I could return to Earth as myself, months later you had vanished. No forwarding address, no trace. I searched everywhere, hired the best investigators, checked every database, followed every possible lead. I changed my name, Arya said numbly. When I found out I was pregnant and people started asking questions about the father, I became Arya Clark and moved to the outer settlements. I thought you were just another man who'd gotten bored with his human plaything. Never, Kalian said fiercely, reaching for her hand. Never for a single moment. Every day for 3 years, I've regretted not finding a way to tell you the truth. To explain why I had to choose between saving the world and breaking your heart. Arya looked down at their joined hands, alien blue skin against human flesh, two different species, two different worlds, but somehow fitting together perfectly. Then she looked at the twins, sleeping peacefully in their crib, living proof that love could transcend any boundary. Samuel and Luna, she said quietly. They're named after stars. Samuel for the first star you ever showed me, and Luna for the Earth's moon that you said reminded you of home. You remembered? He whispered. I remembered everything. Every conversation, every laugh, every promise you made. Even when I hated you, I couldn't forget how happy you'd made me. She met his eyes, her own swimming with tears. I loved you so much, and when you left, it nearly destroyed me. But watching you tonight, seeing you risk everything to save us, I realized something. What? You never really left. Not the man I loved. You've been fighting for us all along, haven't you? The policies protecting hybrid children, the refugee assistance programs, the cultural exchange initiatives, those were all you. Kalian nodded, unable to speak. You've been taking care of us from the shadows for years, even when you didn't know we existed. Arya's voice was thick with emotion. Even when you thought I hated you. She leaned forward then, still holding his hand, and pressed her forehead to his in the intimate gesture of their shared past. I forgive you, she whispered. For leaving, for lying, for making the hardest choice anyone should ever have to make. I forgive you, and I love you. I never stopped loving you. When Kalian kissed her, it was with 3 years of longing, regret, and desperate hope. And when the twins stirred in their crib, making the soft sounds that meant they were waking, both parents moved to tend to them together. Finally, they were a family. 6 months later, Arya stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the royal chambers, watching the twin sons of Colonia rise over a kingdom transformed. In her arms, Samuel gurgled contentedly while Luna reached tiny fingers toward the dancing lights that filtered through the crystalline architecture. Both babies had grown strong and healthy, their distinctive glowing eyes now a source of wonder rather than fear throughout the realm. The changes had not come easily. The first month after Thax's failed coup had been a political nightmare. Half the royal council demanded that Kalian abdicate for his contamination of the bloodline, while the other half worried about the precedent of a king choosing personal desires over traditional duty. Protests erupted in the capital, some supporting their beloved king's right to love whom he chose, others fearing what hybrid heirs might mean for Colonian purity. But then something unexpected happened. The people began to see Samuel and Luna not as threats to their civilization, but as bridges to a larger galaxy. News footage of the twins, laughing with their father, reaching for their mother's face with innocent joy, spread across both Colonian and human media networks. Here was proof that two species could create something beautiful together, that differences could be sources of strength rather than division. Your Majesty! Councillor Vex's voice came from the chamber's entrance, though her tone had grown respectful rather than merely dutiful. The delegation from Earth has arrived for the ceremony. Arya turned, adjusting Luna in her arms while Samuel babbled his own commentary on the morning. Thank you, Counselor. We'll be down shortly. Today was the day everything would be made official. After months of political maneuvering, cultural negotiations, and careful diplomacy, the Royal Council had finally voted to recognize Samuel and Luna as legitimate heirs to the Colonian throne. More importantly, Earth's government had agreed to establish the twins as official ambassadors between the two worlds, living symbols of what cooperation could achieve. Kalian emerged from the adjacent room, resplendent in ceremonial robes that somehow managed to incorporate both Colonian tradition and human aesthetics. The plasma wound from Thax's attack had healed completely, leaving only the faintest of scars, a reminder of the price of protecting what mattered most. Ready? He asked, taking Samuel from Arya's arms with the practiced ease of a devoted father. Arya looked at herself in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back bore little resemblance to the desperate beggar who had knelt in the rain 6 months ago. The ceremonial gown she wore was a masterpiece of alien craftsmanship, flowing fabric that seemed to capture starlight, cut in lines that honored both her human heritage and her new role as queen consort of Colonia. But it was her eyes that showed the greatest change. Gone was the haunted desperation of a woman fighting for survival. In its place was the quiet strength of someone who had found her place in the universe. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. The great hall of the palace had been transformed for the ceremony. Representatives from dozens of worlds filled the crystalline amphitheater, their diverse forms creating a tapestry of galactic unity that would have been unthinkable just years before. Human dignitaries sat beside Colonian nobles, while other species that had found peace through Kalian's progressive policies watched with interest. As they entered the hall, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Kalian walked with the dignity of absolute authority, but it was Arya who drew the most attention. Here was a human woman who had risen from refugee to royalty not through conquest or manipulation, but through love that had survived betrayal, separation, and the machinations of those who feared change. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Ancient words spoken in languages that predated most civilizations, updated with modern vows that acknowledged the unique nature of their union. When Kalian placed the queen's crown on Arya's head, a circlet of crystallized light that seemed to float rather than rest on her hair, the hall erupted in applause that echoed from 1,000 different worlds. But it was the moment when they presented the twins to the assembled crowd that truly changed everything. Samuel and Luna, now 6 months old, had grown into their hybrid nature beautifully. Their eyes glowed with soft bioluminescence that painted patterns of light across their faces, while their mixed heritage showed in features that were unmistakably both human and Colonian. When Luna reached toward the crowd and Samuel babbled what might have been his first attempt at words, even the most skeptical council members found themselves smiling. "Behold the future!" Kalian's voice carried across the hall without amplification, powered by the harmonic resonance that marked true Colonian royalty. "Not human, not Colonian, but something new. Something better. Living proof that our species can build tomorrow together." The ovation that followed seemed to shake the palace to its foundations. Later, as the celebration continued into the night and diplomats discussed trade agreements while children from a dozen species played together in the palace gardens, Arya found herself back at the windows where the day had begun. Kalian joined her there, slipping his arms around her waist as she cradled the now sleeping twins. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up the simple life you could have had?" "Never," he said without hesitation. "Though I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found you in that storm." "You would have kept searching," Arya replied, leaning back against his chest. "And I would have kept running. And eventually, fate would have brought us together anyway. Some things are just meant to be." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, not the violent storm that had brought them together, but the gentle precipitation that nourished new growth. Kalian tightened his arms around his family, and whispered the words that had become his sacred vow. "Never again will I leave you to face the storm alone." As dawn broke over a kingdom that had learned to embrace change, the royal family stood united, no longer refugees or strangers, but proof that love could indeed weather any storm. In their arms, Samuel and Luna slept peacefully, dreaming perhaps of the bright future they would help build, bridging worlds that had once seemed impossibly apart. True love, it seemed, could indeed bring soulmates back together, even across the vast expanse of galaxies. And sometimes, just sometimes, it could change the universe in the process.